love you with all my heart and think of nothing but a future with the two of us, never to be separated again.
The mistress takes the stand one last time as both sides rest their case in the murder trial of Dr. Martin MacNeill. The prosecution called Gypsy Willis to the stand again today, and she read love letters between the two. Joining us with legal analysis is criminal defense attorney Greg Skordas. Thank you so much for joining us again. Sure. Okay, let's talk about Gypsy Willis's testimony. Was it worth it for the prosecution to bring her back?
I think that they had to bring her back in one respect, and that is that she hadn't been able to testify to anything that happened while she and he were incarcerated in the federal penitentiary. Once the federal witnesses testified, all of that came out. And so the state, it was then clear that he had been incarcerated, that he'd been in prison. So she was now able to talk about what happened while they were in prison and the love letters and that stuff.
And they gave her an immunity deal as well. Why would they do that?
To get her to testify, because they don't want her to do what some of the witnesses have allegedly done and say, hey, I'm going to invoke the Fifth Amendment. I'm not involved in this homicide. I don't want to get charged with it. So they give her immunity, saying you can't invoke the Fifth Amendment because you don't have any exposure.
And then, of course, during this time, she had said that her and Dr. Martin MacNeill had not been in a relationship for years and years. Do you think in any way that she was protecting him? And what about the love letters that she did read? What did they indicate? What did they reveal, if anything?
Well, two things. I guess it sounds like she's protecting herself. I mean, she's the other woman. She's certainly had her reputation embarrassed as a result of all of this. I mean, she was the cause of an alleged homicide, if you will. The love letters sort of show that she was lonely, that she was depressed, and that she was maybe even a little vulnerable when he's sending her letters and she's replying. I mean, she's in prison. I can understand that from both of their sides.
And the jury was allowed to ask her questions. I found that interesting. Is that typical?
It's been recently more and more done in Utah courts, where a witness will finish their testimony and their cross-examination, and then they can write questions down. The judge will then review those questions with the attorneys, because some may not be appropriate, and then read the questions to the witness. And the witness, of course, doesn't know which, and no one knows which juror wrote the question, but we know that they wrote questions.
I see. Okay, that paints a clearer picture for me there. So, you know, these questions obviously have to be approved ahead of time.
Oh, yes,
they can't just be
They don't just
questions.
get to shout them out. Right.
Okay, so the state rested its case. Today was all, you know, about the defense after Gypsy Willis, and they had four people that they called to the stand. Which one do you think was the most powerful?
Well, I don't know that the defense was expecting any of them to be really powerful. I mean, there were some witnesses that established his alibi. Two of them, one from the school where Ada was, and one from MacNeill's work, that established that he was there and at a certain time, and his sort of demeanor, how he was at the time. And then they had a parole officer who was sort of critical of one of the inmate witnesses. Right.
We weren't expecting to hear from the parole officer.
Right, because we weren't sure we were going to hear from the inmate or what they were going to say. So the parole officer can then come in and say, you know, I've known this inmate, and may testify about his credibility. And then there was the last witness, which is what they called the ergonomics witness, to testify that it would have been difficult for a person to lift a body out of a bathtub.
Prosecution took, of course, weeks with their case, and then you had the defense was not even an entire day. Is that typical?
It's expected in this case, because the defense is that there's no evidence. The defense, when you hear their closing arguments tomorrow, they're going to say the prosecution has put on a lot of stuff, but we still all have some doubt about what's occurred here. I suppose that's what they're going to tell the jury.
All right, Greg, I'm going to put you on the spot here, because closing arguments are tomorrow, and so you've heard the testimony, obviously, now. Who do you think has the stronger case? What do you think the jury will decide?
Oh, I can't answer that.
What?
I mean, I love you, but I couldn't go down that road. I mean, really, I think that the jury, I respect the system, and I respect the court, and I want the jury to make their decision in a vacuum, and I think we all do. I mean, the state's put on a very, very good case. These are very skilled lawyers on both sides.
Well, the jury isn't watching media reports.
Well, we hope not, but I wouldn't feel comfortable with that.
So you won't say which one has a stronger case, but again, the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Michelle MacNeill was murdered.
Right.
Yet no one, not one medical expert, has ruled this a homicide. So isn't that in itself reasonable doubt for those jurors?
That's the defense closing argument. You just made it. And that's what their argument's going to be. And
I should be an attorney.
You should. You'd be great. And the prosecution's going to say, well, but the medical examiner didn't hear everything you heard, members of the jury. The medical examiner only saw the body And they went through that and did their examination, but they didn't hear all the other things that the jurors heard. And so the prosecution's going to say, jurors, it's now your time to decide what caused her death.
Seems like a very complicated case. Like this could go one way or the other. Is it possible that this could result in a hung jury?
It's always possible, but I've done about 150 jury trials myself. 2 were hung jurors. I mean, it's rare. I mean, jurors, especially in a case like this where there have been several weeks, they want to come to a conclusion, and the judge is going to want them to come to a conclusion, and a unanimous conclusion. So they're pretty rare.
And how long do you think, based on all the testimony, it will take them to come up with a decision? So the closing arguments tomorrow, then it's adjourned, and they go back and deliberate, right?
Yeah, I would expect they deliberate most of next week.
Most of next week. So we won't know for days and days.
That's what I would think.
All right, Greg, thank you so much for joining us again this afternoon.
You bet.
Appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.